Number 5. And that is, everyone's going to tell you on social media that these rankings don't matter. And I couldn't disagree more. Really. They absolutely matter. Like, I don't quite understand. That's like saying the first quarter of a game doesn't matter. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, I know we're not rewarding a win or a loss, but we're building towards it. Like, what are you talking about? They don't matter. These absolutely matter for a number of different reasons. Let me just go through a couple. One is resume building. You know, when we're trying to build a resume as a program, any program, you do that through wins against teams that are included in this list. So when you are clearly valuing a team like an LSU way higher than you are other teams, maybe with 2 losses, then yeah, it's going to matter because you're building a resume. And then that resume is all that gets put up in front of that committee on that last day. What are you on the board? So of course it matters. And I feel like that almost goes without saying. But then there's some deeper things in this. And I think that these also matter in the grand scheme of college football. Perception matters a great deal in this sport. In particular, in a sport in which we crown our champion in a subjective way, which we're going through that exercise right now, but also when we gather talent via the perception of our program. This is not a draft. This is recruiting. So it matters a great deal the way people in general view our program, any program. And because of that, when there is clearly a bias or a glass ceiling above your program, that directly impacts globally the perception of your program, and it will impact your recruiting. If I'm a recruit and I get a letter from TCU, from Oklahoma, from Clemson, from Tennessee, and from Utah, my perception of those programs will impact the way that I view those letters. And when there seems to be a glass ceiling based on the way that team achieves and the way they are perceived when it comes to the subjective 4-team invitational that we have at the end of the season, that will impact what I think as that player or recruit in terms of where I want to go. There's a burden of proof on teams like Utah and TCU. Okay, there is that glass ceiling. There is not a burden of proof on a team like Alabama that can lose a game and still be ranked ahead of an undefeated TCU. They can go on the road to Texas and barely win by a point. They can play a horrendous Texas A&M team and have A&M have a snap to win the game at the end of the game. Like, all of these things are true. And yet it doesn't matter because the burden of proof is not on Alabama. They get the best players. They have the most money. They've got the best coach. And the burden of proof is on the little guy, TCU. It's on you, TCU, to prove to us, the keepers of the sport, that you can be ranked ahead of Alabama, even when Alabama loses a game. And when we're asked about it, guess what we're going to say? Well, we just felt like they fell behind in some games. Oh, you know, like when Alabama fell behind, when the clock struck 0, I remember that too. How about when they were behind for the majority of the game against Texas? How about when Clemson was behind at home to Syracuse and had to, pull their quarterback in order to come back and win that game with a 17-0 run? By the way, that was a week before Notre Dame went up and just thumped that Syracuse team. But, hey, who am I to say? There is a burden of proof on TCU that impacts the perception of the way everyone views that program. And that is a real thing. So that's why these rankings matter. You cannot just say that the rankings don't matter. You build your resume based off these rankings, and you build your perception based off these rankings. And those are the only two things that matter when it comes to recruiting talent and making it to the playoff. So that's why these things matter, and they're going to continue to matter for the rest of the season, which is why every single Wednesday right here on the Joel Klatt Show, this is what we're going to be talking about, is these CFP top 25 rankings.